Hello, good morning. This is Dr. Iftakhar Ahmed Ansari, Department of Political Science, Aligarh Muslim University. We had been talking about methods in political science, and in that, today I'm going to talk about empirical method. Now, empirical orientation in political science, this has led to realization that the real world of politics could not be understood through images of an ideal state or merely in terms of formal institutions which may operate differently in actual practice. It set a new trend of understanding politics as a process which takes place within the larger framework of social system, the empirical approach. Now, empirical approach is concerned with facts. It's descriptive, it deals with real world. On the other hand, normative approach is concerned with values, it's prescriptive, it deals with ideals. In other words, empirical approach is concerned with what is there. The normative approach is concerned with what ought to be done. Now, if we talk about the origin of empiricism or empirical method, the very first sentence that came out of the ancient empiricist, that I will not believe unless I see it. Now, this powerful statement bespeaks the impact of empiricism. Now, the emergence of medieval sciences during the Renaissance period, it laid the foundation of modern science, and the world, this word itself has its root in the Greek. It is derived from the Greek word empirikos, which means experienced. In today's world, the word empirical refers to a collection of data using evidence that is collected through observation and experience or by using calibrated scientific instruments. All of the above origins have one thing in common, which is dependence of observation and experience to collect data and test them to come up with conclusions. Now, if you want to define empirical method or empirical word itself, it is defined as any research analysis where conclusion of the study is strictly drawn from the concretely empirical evidence. And therefore, those evidences can be verified. This empirical evidence can be gathered using either quantitative method or qualitative method. For example, an experiment is conducted by using, for example, spiritual music website survey. On a set of audience who are exposed to spiritual music and another set of audience who are not listening to any music at all. Now, out of these two sets of audiences who are exposed and not exposed, we call them subjects. They are observed and the reactions are taken in. Now, the results derived from such a research will give empirical evidence. If you see the essential requisites of empirical method, we find that it deals with observable facts and data. Secondly, it aims at explanation. That is, it seeks to establish a kind of a correlation between different variables, to explore the cause and effect kind of a relationship between variables, and to arrive at possible generalization finally. Now, it tends to make predictions as well. That is, when certain data and the precise relationship between different variables are established and known, the predictions can be drawn and the result can be predicted and later on can be verified. Talking about types of methods, here in empirical method, we further have two ways of doing it, and that is quantitatively or qualitatively. Now, when we say quantitative research, quantitative method, it is used to gather information through numerical data. It is used to quantify opinions, behaviors, or other defined variables. Now, these are predetermined and are in a more structured format. Now, some of the commonly used methods in quantitative research methodology are survey or longitudinal studies or polls, etc. When we talk about a qualitative method or qualitative way of doing empirical studies, we find it is used to gather non-numerical data. It is used to find meanings, opinions, or underlying reasons from its subjects on whom it is administered. Now, these methods are unstructured, or sometimes semi-structured, and the sample size for such a research is usually small. It is conventional type of method to provide more insight, or it is a kind of in-depth information about the problem. Now, some of the most popular methods are focus groups, interviews, experiments, or interviews itself directly. Now, if we think of explaining what empirical method is, so data collection from all these methods, that is whether qualitative or quantitative, will need to be analyzed. So empirical evidence can be analyzed either quantitatively or qualitatively again. Now, using this, the researcher can answer empirical questions which have to be clearly defined and answerable with the findings he has got. So the type of research design used will uh, vary from one field to another. Now, many of them might choose to do a collective research involving quantitative and qualitative method to better answer questions which cannot be studied in laboratory setting. Now, quantitative research methods within the empirical way of doing things is first is survey research. Now, survey research generally involves a large audience to collect a large amount of data. Now, this is a quantitative method having a predetermined set of closed questions which are pretty easy to answer. Now, because of the simplicity of such a method, high responses are achieved. Now, it is one of the most commonly used methods for all kinds of research in today's world. Now, previously, surveys were taken face to face, only maybe with the help of a recorder. However, with the advancement in technology and for ease, new mediums such as email, social media have emerged. For example, if you want to study about depletion of energy resources, which is a growing concern, and hence there is a need for awareness about renewable energy, such methods can be applied, a survey method, and through the responses, it can be very easily found out whether there is a concern regarding this depletion of energy resources, there is awareness or not. Then further on, we say next is experimental research. Besides survey, there's experimental research. Now, experimental research it sets up a hypothesis, and the hypothesis is tested. Now, creating a situation in which one of the variable is manipulated. So, hypothesis tests between two variables, their correlation is found out, and then the hypothesis we tested, it verifies certain things about the variable which has been found out during experiment. Now, this is also used to check the cause and effect. It is tested to see what happens to independent variable if the other one is removed or altered. So, the process of such a method is usually proposing a hypothesis, then experimenting on it, analyzing the findings, and reporting the findings to understand if it supports the theory or not. For example, a particular product, for example, in a company, or a product of a company is trying, the company itself is trying to find out about the product, like what is the reason for them not be able to capture the market. Okay, so the organization makes changes in such one of the processes like manufacturing, marketing, or sale, or operations. Now, through the experiment, they understand that sales training directly impacts the marketing coverage of their product. So that's how such experiment researchers are helpful in finding the cause and effect and rectifying it and making subsequent changes. Another form of quantitative method is correlational research. Now, correlation is used to find relation between two sets of variables. Now, here a regression, one of the statistical technique, is used to predict outcome of such a method. It can be positive, it can be negative, or it could be neutral correlation as well. For example, if one is trying to find out higher educated individuals, now would they get higher paying jobs? Now, this means higher education enables the individual to high paying jobs, and less educated will lead to a lower paying job. So the correlation is found between the education itself and its relation with a high paying jobs, whether it's the correlation is positively related or negatively related. That's how it is found out. Then another way of doing quantitative research is a longitudinal study. Now, longitudinal study is used to understand the traits and behavior of a subject under observation after repeatedly testing the subject over a period of time. So, longitudinal itself indicates a period of time on which the same subject is exposed to certain kind of experiment, and then those experiments and the results are factored in. For example, research to find out benefits of exercise on one's individual's body. So the target, that is the subject on whom that experiment has been done, is asked to exercise every day for a particular period of time, and the results show high endurance or stamina or muscular growth. Now this supports the fact that exercise benefits an individual's body. Then another is cross-sectional kind of a research which can be done in this quantitative method. Now, cross-sectional study is an observational type of method in which a set of audience is observed at a given point of time. Now, in this set, in this type, a set of people are chosen in a fashion which predicts similarity in all the variables except the one which is being researched. Now, this type does not enable the research to establish a cause and effect kind of relation, as it is not observed over a period of time. It is majorly used by healthcare sector or by retail industry. For example, a medical study to find the prevalence of undernutrition or disorder in kids for a given population. Now, this will involve looking at a wide range of parameters like age, ethnicity, location, income, social backgrounds. So if a significant number of kids coming from poor families show undernutrition disorders, the researcher can further investigate into it. So usually a cross-sectional study is followed by a longitudinal study to find out the exact reason. Another way of doing a quantitative method is causal comparative research. Now, this method is based on comparison. Now, it's mainly used to find out the cause and effect relationship between two variables or even multiple variables. For example, here a researcher can measure the productivity of employee in a company, which gives break to the employees doing the work, and compared that to the employees of the company, which did not give breaks at all. So comparing these two and many more companies on this parameter, a result can be found out, and a cause and effect kind of a relation can be drawn. Then the second way of doing is the qualitative research. Now, in qualitative, in-depth information is needed. Now, for that in-depth information, a target audience behavior is observed over a period of time. Now, here the results are presented in descriptive form. So here it becomes more descriptive than prescriptive or predictive. So it builds a support theory for the future potential qualitative research on that. Now, there is another way that is doing a qualitative kind of a research in empirical method is a case study. Now, case study generally involves study of a case where more information through careful analysis of existing cases is found out, and it is very often used for business research or kind of empirical evidence for investigation purpose. So it's a method to investigate a problem within its real life context through existing cases. So wherever in-depth information is required, a case study is generally conducted. It's a part of this empirical method. So parameters and variables in the existing cases are taken to be the same as that of cases which is being investigated. Now, for example, a report mentioning the solution provided by an investigating team about communal violence, for example, the challenges they faced during initiation and deployment, and the findings of the case and solutions they offered for the problems. Such case studies used by most of the welfare governments, as it forms an empirical evidence to promote social order to get more business investment. Then, if we talk about another method, we find it's in both the cases where it is used, qualitative and quantitative, both the places, it's observational method. Now, observational method is a process to observe and gather data from its target. Now, since it's a qualitative method, it is time consuming and very personal. Now, same observation method is also applied in quantitative research as well. So it generally involves a time which it takes. So it can be said that observational method is a part of some kind of ethnographic research, which is also used to gather empirical evidence. Now, this is usually a qualitative form of research. However, in some cases, it can be qualitative as well, depending on what is being studied. For example, setting up a research to observe a particular leader in conducting foreign affairs of a country. Now, such a research usually takes a lot of time, as observation has to be made for a set amount of time to study patterns or behavior of the subject. So another example used widely nowadays is to observe citizens' voting behavior in election to figure out the pattern of behavior of citizens. Now, another way of doing this qualitative kind of a research in empirical method is one-to-one interview. Now, such a method is purely qualitative and one of the most widely used. And the reason being, it enables the researcher to get precise, meaningful data if the right questions are asked. And it's a conversational method where in-depth data can be gathered depending on where the conversation leads. Now, it can be structured, it cannot be structured. Both ways it can be. If it is structured, then it can be also used as a quantitative way of doing research. And if it is unstructured, it can be used as a qualitative research. For example, a one-to-one interview with the finance minister to gather data on financial policies of the country and its implication on the public. Then another method is focus group. Now, focus groups are used when a researcher wants to find answer to why, what, or how kind of a question. So a small group is generally chosen for such a method, and it is not necessary to interact with the group in person. A moderator is generally needed in case the group is being addressed in person. Now, this is widely used by media houses to collect data about their government, their flagship policy, and the reform measures. For example, a mobile phone manufacturer wants to have a feedback on the dimension of one of their modes or one of their models which is yet to be launched. Now, such studies help the company meet the demands of the customer and position their model appropriately in the market. In political terminologies, what we can say is the government, it can find out the responses or people's reaction on different policies that it has initiated, and on the basis of it, it can see the popularity of certain policy measures which can be further enhanced or further it can be provided, or certain changes which can be made at the level of policy making to make it more popular or bring the welfare measure to the doors of the people. Then another way is our text analysis. Now, text analysis method is a little new compared to other types. Such a method is used to analyze social life by going through images and words used by individual. In today's world, with social media playing a major part of everyone's life, such a method enables the researcher to follow the pattern that relates to his study. For example, a lot of companies ask for feedback from the customer in detail, mentioning how satisfied are they with their customer support team. Now, this is something in political sphere we do not have, that's too common, like government asking from the people, like how satisfied they are. It's only the amount of vote that they receive at the husting that is taken as approval or disapproval of their policy measures. But then if really the parties or the government wants to make an impact on the people, such gathering of information in line with the companies can really be very beneficial. So such data enable the researcher to take appropriate decisions to make their teams or their performance better. Now, if you talk about what are the steps which are generally taken in empirical method, so we find it is generally based, since empirical method is based on observation and capturing experiences, it is important to plan the steps to conduct the experiment and how to analyze it. It helps the researcher solving the problem or resolving the problem and obstacles which can come later on. So very first thing is to define the purpose of what they are going to find, that is the research. Now, this is the first step where the researcher has to answer questions like, what exactly do I want to find out? What is the problem statement? Are there any issues in terms of availability of knowledge or data or time or resources? Will this research be more beneficial than what it will cost? So before going ahead, if such questions are looked into and appropriately addressed, then later on some of the resources and time can be saved in a very fruitful manner. It can be utilized whatever it's available. So researcher has to clearly define his purpose for such kind of research and set up a plan to carry out further tasks. Then second step in, in the line of empirical method is finding out supporting theories and relevant literature. The researcher needs to find out if there are theories which can be linked to his research problem. He has to figure out if any theory can help him support his findings. So all kind of relevant literature will help the researcher to find if there are others who have researched this before, or what are the problems faced during this research. And the researcher will also have to set up assumptions and also find out if there is any history regarding his research problem. The third step is creation of hypothesis and measurement. Now, hypothesis formation is a very important part of empirical method, which was not there in a normative way of doing things. So before beginning the actual researcher, he needs to provide himself with a working hypothesis or guess, like what will be the probable result. The researcher has to set up variables, decide an environment for the research, and find out how can he relate between the variables on whom he is going to experiment. So researcher will also need to define the units of measurements, then tolerable degree of error, and find out if the measurement chosen will be accepted by others. And in that methodology formation or design is another aspect, the fourth step that needs to be taken. So in this step, the researcher has to define a strategy for conducting his research. He has to set up experiments to collect data which will enable him to propose the hypothesis. Then the researcher will decide whether he will need experimental or non-experimental kind of a method for conducting the research. Now the type of research design will vary depending on the field in which the research is being conducted. And researcher will have to find out parameters that will affect the validity of the research design. Validity is the acceptability of its design. Then data collection will need to be done by choosing appropriate samples depending on the research question. So carrying out the research, he can use one of the many sampling techniques, probable or non-probable way of doing things. And once data is collected and it's complete, researcher will have to do an empirical data analysis later on to draw results out of it. Then fifth step is data analysis and result. Data analysis can be done in two ways. One is qualitative and then another is quantitative. So researcher will need to find out what qualitative method or quantitative method will be needed, or will he combine both the methods. So depending on the analysis of his data, he will know if his hypothesis is supported or rejected. So analyzing this data is the most important part to support his hypothesis. Now, next step final is conclusion. A report will need to be made with the help of findings of the research, and the researcher can give the theories and literature that support his research. He can make suggestions and recommendations for further research on his topic. Now, there are certain steps that needs to be followed in empirical method, and we have talked about the observation part of it. And besides observation, there is another way of doing it, that is induction method. Now, inductive reasoning is then generally carried out for a general conclusion from the data gathered through observation. It's one of the part of the analysis part. For example, as stated above, it is observed that the species of, for example, if one is, just for the sake of clarification, this example is given, species of flower, which species of flower bloom in a different color during a specific season, like if that is the research point of research, then a researcher may ask a question: does the temperature in the season causes the color change in the flower? Is it the temperature or something else? So he can assume that if that is the case, however, it's merely a conjecture. Hence, an experiment need to be set up to support this hypothesis. Now, if he comes up with the hypothesis that in fact it is the temperature which causes the change, so with that hypothesis, he will go out in the field and see if it's temperature or something else. So he tags a few set of flowers kept at different temperatures and then observe if they still change the color. Okay, that is that way of doing things was inductive way of doing things. Then there is a deductive way of analyzing. So this phase helps the researcher to deduce a conclusion out of his experiment. Now, this has to be based on logic and rationality to come up with a specific unbiased result. Now, for example, in the same experiment, if the tagged flowers in a different temperature environment do not change color, then it can be concluded that the temperature plays no role in changing the color of the bloom. Now, so if such conclusions are drawn, that way of drawing conclusion is what a deductive way of reasoning is called. Then another is testing. Now, testing this phase involves a researcher to return to empirical method to put his hypothesis to the test. So the researcher now needs to make sense of his data and hence needs to use statistical method to determine the temperature and bloom color relationship. Now, the researcher finds out the most flower bloom a different color when exposed to certain temperature and others do not. When the temperature is different, he has found support to his hypothesis. So if such supports are found, it's not a proof, it's just a support to his hypothesis. Then evaluation is another step in that regard of analysis. So evaluation is the phase is generally forgotten by most, but it's an important one to keep gaining knowledge. So during this phase, the researcher puts forth the data he has collected, the support argument, and his conclusion. So the researcher also states the limitations for the experiment and his hypothesis and suggests tips for others to pick up and continue a more in-depth research for others in future. Now, when we talk about advantages of the empirical method that we have discussed so far, so it is used to authenticate traditional research through various experiments and observations. First thing, now this research methodology, that is empirical method, it makes the research being conducted more competent and authentic. It enables a researcher to understand the dynamic nature that can happen and change his strategy accordingly. So the level of control in such a research is high on the researcher part, so he can control the multiple variables and see their cause and effect kind of a relation. So it plays a vital role in increasing internal validity, that is acceptability of the research. Now, if we talk about disadvantages, we find such a research needs patience as it can be very time consuming and the researcher has to collect data from multiple sources and the parameters involved are quite a few, which will lead to a time consuming research. So most of the time, the researcher will need to conduct research at different locations or at different environments. Now, this can lead to an expensive affair. So there are a few rules in which experiment can be performed and hence sometimes permissions are also needed. So many a time it's difficult to get certain permissions to carry out different methods of this research. So collection of data can be a problem. Sometimes it has to be collected from a variety of sources through different methods. And talking about its importance, we find that it is used to validate multiple hypotheses and increase human knowledge and continue doing it to keep advancing in various fields. For example, a pharmaceutical company, for example, use empirical research to carry out a policy measure by controlling groups of random people or random groups to study the effect or study the cause of something. Now, this way, they prove certain theories they had proposed for their specific policy. Now, such research is very important as sometimes it can lead to finding a solution to a problem that has existed for many years. Such a research is not just useful in science, but in many other fields like history, social sciences, business, political science. And further, with the advancement in today's world, empirical research has become critical as well as a norm in many fields so as to support their hypothesis and gain more knowledge. So the methods mentioned above are very useful in carrying out such research. However, a number of new methods will keep coming up as the nature of new investigative questions. They keep getting unique or keep changing. So what basically we have found that in empirical method, there are a number of techniques, number of ways of doing things. We quantify it, through observation and through inductive and deductive methods, we try to analyze it. And whatever is done, it's all done on the basis of facts, and facts are needed to be collected first. And after collecting the fact, and that collection has to be in an unbiased and objective manner. So objectivity has to be ensured and then analyzed using statistical method or through the reasoning method, deductive, inductive, abductive method, and then come to a certain conclusion. And that conclusion is the knowledge which is being created through this method. So with that, I come to the end of my lecture, that is on empirical method. Thanks for watching. Thank you.